It is August 23rd, 1305. London wakes to a day that will be remembered for centuries. By mid-morning, the streets are overflowing. Merchants have abandoned their shops, nobles have left their chambers, and ordinary citizens pour in from every corner of the city. They are not here for food or drink. They are here for blood. They have come to witness a man's brutal death, carried out in a way only the darkest minds could invent. From afar, you can hear it, the rumble of wooden boards scraping stone, the steady rhythm of hooves striking the ground, and another sound far more disturbing. It is the dragging of torn flesh across rough cobblestones, leaving behind a red trail that scavenger birds will soon follow. The crowd opens, uneasy and eager at once. Bound naked to a wooden hurdle, tied behind a horse, is William Wallace. The man who dreamed of Scotland's freedom is now being hauled like livestock to slaughter. His body bears every mark of England's rage. Across the 400-mile journey from Scotland, every stone and lash has left its trace. His skin is ripped to shreds, his back crisscrossed with wounds, and yet his eyes still blaze with defiance, even as the crowd spits and hurls filth at him. Wallace refuses to yield. Before we continue exploring these stories of human struggle and endurance, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, make sure to like and subscribe. Share in the comments where you're listening from. It never ceases to amaze me how people from all over the world can gather here, linked by our shared curiosity about the past, to grasp the full terror of what awaits Wallace. We must turn back the clock 35 years to a Scotland that once knew calm. The year is 1270, and in the fertile hills of Renfrew, a boy is born to Sir Malcolm Wallace, a minor landowner with simple ambitions, to work his fields and serve his lord. The child is named William, with no hint that this boy would one day have the most powerful king in Europe calling for his death. As he grows, William becomes both strong in body and sharp in mind. He learns to read and write, rare skills for someone of his rank, and studies Latin under the monks. But his strength is what captures attention. By the time he turns 20, William Wallace towers at nearly 6'1" ft tall, broad-shouldered, and strong-handed enough to wield a 6-foot sword with lethal skill. During his youth, Scotland flourishes under King Alexander III. Markets thrive, harvests are bountiful, and families rest peacefully at night. But fate intervenes cruelly. In 1286, on a stormy night near Kinghorn, Alexander III falls to his death from a cliff while riding. His passing shatters Scotland's stability. The crown falls to Margaret, known as the Maid of Norway, a 3-year-old child who has never set foot on Scottish soil. For 4 years, the kingdom is held together by regents, riddled with intrigue and uncertainty. Then, in 1290, tragedy strikes again. Young Margaret dies while traveling to claim her throne. Scotland is left leaderless, vulnerable, and teetering on the edge of chaos. This is the moment Edward Longshanks steps in. Edward, son of England, standing 6'2" and tall at a time when most men barely reached 5'1" ft, is a seasoned warrior king He has already subdued Wales with ruthless efficiency, and now his ambitions turn north. When the Scottish nobles, desperate to prevent civil war, ask him to judge between rival claimants to their throne, they unknowingly invite the wolf into their fold. Edward chooses John Balliol, a man weak-willed and easy to manipulate, someone he believes will bend to his control, and so begins the long, bloody struggle that will consume Scotland and elevate William Wallace from an obscure landowner's son to a symbol of resistance. But Edward's ambitions go far beyond simply choosing Scotland's king. He demands that Scottish nobles kneel to him directly, that their legal disputes be decided in English courts, and that Scottish knights fight in his foreign wars. Every demand pulls the rope tighter around Scotland's neck. By 1296, even the weak-willed Balliol cannot bear the shame any longer. He tries to reassert Scotland's independence, striking an alliance with France and renouncing his oath to Edward. The English king reacts without hesitation. His armies flood across the border like an unstoppable tide. The first city they meet, Berwick-upon-Tweed, is turned into a warning, carved in blood. The sack of Berwick is remembered as one of the most savage acts in medieval Britain. Edward's soldiers don't just crush the defenders, they slaughter nearly every living soul. Men, women, children, even infants at their mothers' breasts, all cut down without mercy. Chroniclers describe rivers running red, corpses piled high, and a silence so dreadful that even the crows stayed away. 17,000 lives are erased in a single day, guilty of nothing more than being born on the wrong side of a border. This is the Scotland that shapes William Wallace. This furnace of terror and blood hardens his will to steal. When Edward strips Balliol of his crown and jewels, forces him to appear in public in nothing but his undergarments, and declares himself overlord of Scotland, Wallace is there, watching from the shadows. When Scottish nobles bend the knee and sign the ragman roll, swearing loyalty to their conqueror, Wallace grits his teeth in disgust. And when English officials begin handing out Scottish lands to their cronies, treating the kingdom like plunder, something inside Wallace snaps. The spark that sets his rebellion alight comes in May 1297. As with many turning points in history, the exact cause is debated. Some later poems claim it was the murder of his beloved Marion Braidfute. Others suggest it was simply the final straw after too many acts of English cruelty. Whatever the truth, when Wallace draws his sword against William Heselrigg, the English Sheriff of Lanark, he crosses a line from which there is no return. The killing of Heselrigg sends a shockwave through occupied Scotland. At last, here is a man willing to spill English blood. Here is someone who refuses to bow, who dares to defy Edward Longshanks and his fearsome war machine. The reaction is immediate. Men slip away from their farms, their forges, their shops, vanishing into the forests and hills to join Wallace's growing band of rebels. But Wallace is no common outlaw. He has what scattered resistance has lacked, a brilliant tactical mind and an unbreakable belief that Scotland has the right to stand free. When he addresses his followers, his words strike like thunder. We fight not for glory or wealth, he declares, but for freedom alone, which no good man surrenders except with his life. That autumn, 1297, brings the test of all tests, Stirling Bridge. The odds are overwhelming. Barely 6,000 Scots facing 15,000 English troops, including the most feared heavy cavalry in Europe. The English commanders, John de Warenne and Hugh de Cressingham, are so certain of victory that they treat the encounter like a formality. From the far side of the River Forth, they watch as Wallace and his ally, Andrew Murray, arrange their men on the high ground of Abbey Craig. What happens next will defy every military principle of the age. Wallace holds his men back, waiting like a hunter at a snare, as the English army begins crossing the narrow wooden bridge. The crossing is painfully slow. Cavalry, infantry, and supply wagons stretch into a long, vulnerable line. Any ordinary commander would have struck at once, but Wallace sees what his enemies cannot. Timing is everything. Wallace waits until exactly half the English army has crossed the bridge before giving the signal. In an instant, the Scots charge down from the heights, their war cries echoing across the water. The English, trapped with their forces, split by the river, cannot bring their superior numbers into play. Panic erupts. The bridge becomes a killing ground as terrified soldiers trample one another in a desperate attempt to flee. Hugh de Cressingham, Edward's treasurer in Scotland, loathed for his greed and cruelty, falls early in the fighting. In an act of raw vengeance, the Scots flay his body and turn strips of his skin into belts and purses, a grotesque symbol of their rage. By sunset, the so-called invincible English host lies broken, and William Wallace has accomplished the unthinkable. The victory at Stirling Bridge catapults Wallace from rebel leader to national hero. He is appointed guardian of Scotland, effectively the kingdom's ruler. For a fleeting moment, it seems that David has truly struck down Goliath. Wallace leads raids deep into northern England, returning English brutality with equal measure. Villages burn, civilians flee, and terror spreads. If Wallace could defeat England's best on the battlefield, then what other impossibilities might become reality? But Edward Longshanks is no ordinary foe. The conqueror of Wales, hardened by decades of war and seasoned by crusades in the Holy Land, does not tolerate humiliation. Furious, he halts his campaigns in France, summons his greatest knights, and begins building an army whose sole mission is to annihilate William Wallace. The reckoning comes at Falkirk on July 22nd, 1298. This time, Edward makes no mistakes. He has studied Wallace's tactics at Stirling and brings overwhelming force to bear. Wallace's army, though brave, is mostly composed of poorly trained spearmen. They face not only England's elite cavalry, but also the deadly Welsh longbowmen, whose arrows can pierce armor at 200 yards. The battle is a slaughter. Wallace arranges his men in schiltrons, tight circles of pikes jutting outward like giant hedgehogs. They hold against repeated cavalry charges, but they are helpless against the rain of arrows from above. The longbowmen fire relentlessly, cutting down hundreds at a time. The screams of the wounded vanish beneath the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel. When the schiltrons finally break, English cavalry floods through like water, bursting from a shattered dam. Wallace's dearest friend and trusted lieutenant John de Graham fights to the last, struck down by dozens of wounds. The Scottish army collapses, leaving the battlefield strewn with their dead. Wallace narrowly escapes, but his dream of independence is crushed beneath English might. Falkirk marks the darkest chapter of his life. Stripped of his position as guardian, abandoned by nobles who now see him as a burden, Wallace becomes a man without a country. Some accounts claim he travels to France, seeking help from Philip IV. Others suggest he reaches Rome, appealing to Pope Boniface VIII. Whatever the truth, Wallace fades into legend, spoken of in taverns, but never seen. Years pass. Others take up the cause. Robert the Bruce, once an ally of the English, begins his own bid for the crown. John Comyn, Wallace's rival, makes his own uneasy deals with the occupiers. Scotland's nobility, ever pragmatic, bends to survive under English rule. But Edward Longshanks cannot forget. He will not rest until the man who humiliated him at Stirling is destroyed. The end comes in August 1305, not through glorious battle, but through betrayal of the lowest kind. John Menteith, a Scottish knight bought with English gold, lures Wallace into a trap near Glasgow. Perhaps he promises aid for another uprising. Perhaps he offers intelligence about enemy movements. The details are lost. What matters is that Wallace, exhausted from years of hiding, desperate for one more chance to strike, walks into a snare that will cost him everything. When English soldiers close in, his first instinct is to fight, but he is alone, outnumbered, and worn down by years of flight. The giant who once strode across battlefields like a force of nature is bound in chains, a prize destined for his greatest enemy. His march to London is designed not simply to transport him, but to humiliate him. Dragged through every major town, he is displayed like a caged beast for the crowd's amusement. Children pelt him with stones. Adults curse and spit. Filth rains down on the man who once dared to defy a king. Every mile carries him further from the land he fought to free, and closer to the torment awaiting him. Edward Longshanks could have ended it quickly, with a rope and a snapped neck, but that is not enough. He wants a show so terrifying that it will burn into Scotland's memory for generations. He wants every Scot to know the price of defiance. And so, the stage is set at Westminster Hall, England's grandest seat of justice, for William Wallace's final, dreadful act. The hall itself is a monument to English power. Its massive oak beams rise nearly 100 ft overhead, and its stone walls are etched with the symbols of conquering kings. Here, in this fortress of authority, William Wallace is brought before his accusers. The charges read against him would be laughable if their weight weren't so deadly. Treason against King Edward, though Wallace has never sworn fealty to England. Murder and robbery, though the men he killed were occupying soldiers, and the goods he seized were used to support Scotland's struggle. Even sacrilege, his crime, being nothing more than refusing to bow to a foreign ruler. When given the chance to speak, Wallace's voice thunders through the chamber. I cannot be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject. I owe him no allegiance. He is not my king. The words seal his fate, though in truth, That fate was decided long before the trial began. The judges deliver their predetermined verdict. Wallace will be hanged, drawn, and quartered. Even in medieval England, renowned for its brutality, this punishment is the ultimate expression of cruelty, reserved only for men accused of treason. It is designed not merely to kill, but to annihilate, inflicting multiple deaths in one ritual of horror until nothing is left but fragments for the crows. The morning of August 23rd, 1305 breaks heavy and gray. London buzzes with feverish anticipation. Vendors hawk pies and ale to the gathering mob. Nobles jostle for prime viewing spots. Children press to the front, eager for a glimpse of the man who dared to defy a king. The air itself feels thick with bloodlust. At Westminster Hall, Wallace is stripped bare and bound to a crude wooden hurdle, the kind normally used for dragging heavy loads. The symbolism is intentional. He is no longer considered a man, but cargo, to be hauled like refuse to his death. A rope is tied around his feet, fastened to a horse's harness, and with a lurch the animal drags him forward. His final journey through London begins. Each cobblestone becomes a blade. His skin, weakened by months in chains, tears open with every jolt. His head slams against the stones, blood streaming from countless wounds, painting a crimson trail that dogs lap greedily. The crowd follows, a diseased parade of jeers and curses, their voices mingling with a sickening scrape of flesh against stone. The procession winds through narrow streets for what feels like hours, past St. Paul's Cathedral, where priests cross themselves and look away, past bustling markets, where merchants abandon their stalls to join the mob, past noble houses, where lords and ladies watch from windows with expressions caught between fascination and disgust. Wallace drifts in and out of consciousness, his body a wreck of pain, his lips moving in whispers, perhaps prayers, perhaps curses. Finally, the field of Smithfield, known as the Elms, opens before him. This ground has seen countless deaths, but none to rival what is about to unfold. At the center, a wooden platform has been raised, encircled by barriers to control the throng. Ropes and pulleys hang from a timber frame like the rigging of a ship from hell. Braziers burn hot, flames leaping eagerly. The executioner stands ready beside his tools, chosen not for speed, but for skill in prolonging agony. His role is not to kill William Wallace swiftly, but to conduct a masterpiece of torment that will echo for generations. The first stage begins, the hanging. Wallace, barely alive after the ordeal through the streets, is hauled upright beneath the gallows. A rough hemp rope, thick as a man's thumb, is slipped around his neck with practiced ease. The mob grows silent, savoring the anticipation. But this will not be the quick hanging of common thieves. No swift drop, no snapped neck. Wallace is slowly lifted until his feet dangle inches above the ground. The rope tightens, cutting off his breath but not his pulse. His body convulses violently as he struggles for air that will not come. His skin turns purple, then blue, his eyes bulging as pressure builds in his skull. The crowd stares, entranced. Some cheer each spasm, others wager on how long he can endure. Children giggle as his body jerks, pointing at the dancing man. Minutes crawl by, long, punishing minutes, in which Wallace teeters on the edge of death, his brain starved, his chest heaving. At last, the executioner gives a signal. Wallace is lowered back onto the platform, the rope loosened just enough to let him gulp in ragged breaths. His body shudders violently, fighting for life. But mercy is not part of the design. The ordeal has only begun. The second stage commences. The drawing, the disembowelment. Sharp steel flashes in the pale morning light. With cold precision, the executioner plunges his blade beneath Wallace's ribs and drags it downward, slicing him open from sternum to pelvis. Blood floods the platform, steaming in the cool air as the crowd roars. Wallace's eyes snap open as pain sears through his fading consciousness like lightning. A scream rises in his throat, but his damaged larynx can only force out a ragged wheeze. His body strains against the ropes as the executioner, calm and deliberate, reaches into the torn cavity of his chest and abdomen. What follows defies every law of endurance. With the clinical patience of a surgeon, the executioner begins removing Wallace's organs one by one, while he still clings to life. The stomach first, sliding out like a pale, coiled serpent. Then the intestines, yard after yard of glistening, steaming entrails pulled into the open air. Each organ is lifted high for the crowd to see before being cast into the waiting flames. The roar of approval is deafening. The scent of burning flesh mixes with the copper sting of blood and the acrid smoke from the braziers. Many in the crowd gag, covering their faces with cloths, but still they stare, transfixed. They cannot look away. This is not mere execution. It is theater, a performance of state power that strips a man down to parts before thousands of witnesses. But the humiliation is not yet complete. The final insult, castration, awaits. The blade flashes again, and with one swift, practiced cut, Wallace's manhood is severed. The bloody trophy is thrust high before the howling crowd, then hurled into the fire. The message could not be clearer. This is the fate of any who dare defy English rule. And yet, against all odds, Wallace still breathes. His body is shattered, hollowed out, but his chest still heaves for air. His eyes, clouded with pain and death's approach, still burn with that same defiance that carried him through years of struggle. Even now, as life drains from him, drop by drop, he will not surrender. The final act, quartering, must wait until the end. When death at last creeps over him, it does not come with submission, but with something close to triumph. Wallace's lips move faintly, forming words none can hear. A prayer, a curse, or perhaps the name of the land he dies for, Scotland. When his mighty heart finally stops, the executioner steps forward to finish his grisly work. The heavy axe rises and falls in steady rhythm, severing limb after limb with sickening thuds that echo across the field. At last, Wallace's proud head, the head that never bowed, is struck clean from his shoulders and raised high before the hushed crowd. Satisfied, the mob disperses. But Wallace's journey does not end here. His head is boiled in tar to preserve it, then fixed on a spike above London Bridge. the first head ever to decorate that crossing. His 4 quarters are sent north, one to Newcastle, one to Berwick, one to Stirling, and one to Perth. Each grisly relic is meant as a warning to all Scotland. Edward Longshanks believes he has achieved total victory. The rebel who defied him has not just been killed, but annihilated, scattered to the winds. Surely, no one would dare invite the same fate. Surely, the spirit of Scottish resistance has been stamped out forever. But tyrants never grasp a simple truth. Martyrdom has a power greater than flesh. The destruction of Wallace's body gives birth to a legend stronger than any sword. Even as his remains rot on spikes, a fire spreads through Scotland. His death, meant to terrify, instead ignites fury that will burn for generations. Within months, Robert the Bruce slays his rival, John Comyn, inside a church, and claims the Scottish crown. Far from ending, the wars of independence enter an even bloodier phase. At Loudoun Hill, at Bannockburn, and across a dozen battlefields, Scottish warriors march into combat with Wallace's name on their lips, a banner no execution could ever destroy. For years to come, Wallace's name becomes a war cry, a sound that strikes fear deep into English hearts. Edward Longshanks himself never sees Scotland subdued. He dies in 1307, just 2 years after Wallace's execution. His final command, according to legend, that his bones be carried at the head of every English army until Scotland is conquered. But his son, Edward II, proves a far weaker man than his iron-willed father. Under his feeble leadership, England's grip on Scotland weakens and finally snaps. The ultimate irony arrives in 1320, when Scottish nobles gather to sign the Declaration of Arbroath, perhaps the most powerful statement of independence ever written. Its words echo across the centuries with the same defiance that carried Wallace to his death. As long as 100 of us remain alive, never will we be brought under English rule. It is not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we fight, but for freedom, alone, for that which no honest man surrenders but with life itself. Wallace never lived to see the freedom he dreamed of, but his sacrifice planted the seeds that would one day bloom into independence. The execution designed to destroy him instead became the spark that made him eternal. Edward Longshanks sought to crush resistance. Instead, he created a martyr who would inspire it for generations. That is Wallace's true victory. The man torn apart in agony at Smithfield achieved in death what he could not in life. He became immortal, not in body, but in the enduring spirit of a people who would never again bow to a master not of their choosing. Today, more than 7 centuries after that gray morning in London, William Wallace's name still stirs the heart. His story has been retold through the ages, each generation finding in it the courage for their own struggles. The body that was so brutally destroyed long ago has returned to dust, but the idea it carried, that freedom is worth any sacrifice, burns as brightly as ever. Stand today in modern Smithfield, watching the traffic stream past the small memorial plaque marking the place of his death, and one cannot help but wonder, what would Wallace think of his legacy? Would he smile to know his death sparked the very revolution he gave his life to achieve. Would he marvel that his name is still spoken with reverence in the land he loved above all else? Perhaps the answer lies not in speculation, but in the simple fact that he endures. In an age where fame fades quickly and heroes are soon forgotten, William Wallace remains. His story inspires all who face impossible odds, who stand against overwhelming power, who refuse to bend their principles no matter the cost. The execution of Wallace was meant to end his story, to erase a troublesome rebel. Instead, it became the beginning of a legend that outlives kings and empires. In dying as he lived, unyielding, unbowed, and utterly defiant, William Wallace secured the only victory that truly matters. He became immortal, and so the ghost of that tall man from Renfrew still walks with us, whispering that some things are worth fighting for, whatever the price. In every act of courage against impossible odds, in every choice of principle over convenience, in every refusal to bow to unjust authority, the spirit of William Wallace lives on. The body they quartered and scattered to the winds is gone. But the dream he died for, the dream of freedom, burns eternal.